Hi everyone, I am Surabhi and I run Luchi and Mutton's dog behavior and nutrition. I am based out of Gurgaon in India and I offer private behavior and nutrition consultations for pet parents and dog caregivers. I work with a holistic approach using science and empathy as key pillars in supporting dogs in living their best and fulfilled lives. Today, I want to talk about something that I have been actually struggling with figuring out what's the best way to talk about it. And I thought, no better medium than dedicating an entire podcast episode to this. So, what I really want to deep dive into is actually the awesomeness of spirulina and dogs self selecting this incredible plant in powdered form specifically for themselves. I'm actually currently tending to a very sick mutton. One of my dogs, she is, recuperating from tick fever and has been showing really elevated kidney parameters. And just her journey of, healing and recovery has been giving me a lot of different inspirational nuggets. And I think this episode is, born out of some of that. So, today, I'm going to be talking about spirulina, which is so bizarre when I think about it that I'm dedicating an entire podcast episode to this. But hopefully, by the end of the episode, you will also appreciate, I think, the awesomeness and I think just how powerful this plant compound is and just the ton of benefits that it offers for our dogs. So, I want to start by obviously giving a little bit of context because that's always helpful. So, domestic dogs, our pet dogs, and other free living dogs can self medicate when their bodies recognize a challenge like an injury or a disease or stress. The body releases a certain signal, let's say a hormone or a neurotransmitter or a cytokine, and this signal seems to alter taste and smell perception in our dogs. And I suppose this makes sense because, we often see sick dogs struggling with loss of appetite or preferring certain foods over others. This happens to us as well when we're sick. We crave certain, tastes, we crave certain smells, we lose taste for certain kinds of foods. And so all of this is happening because of a response and a reaction internally. And so, this change in smell and taste perception in our dogs also seems to influence their preference for therapeutic plant compounds or components. And so, what seems to happen is that the plant helps to tackle this challenge, which could be injury, disease, or stress. And once that has been tackled, the taste and smell preferences are restored and essentially revert to whatever they were, right? And so, my big learning, both by observing dogs and briefly studying canine zoo pharmacognosy, which is a discipline that essentially studies how dogs and self-select herbs and plants for medicinal purposes, has been to not put medicinal plants in our dogs' food. I feel like this is so important and so critical. And in complete honesty, when I didn't know better, as a canine nutrition consultant, I would recommend adding, medicinal plants and compounds as supplements into the dog's food, into the dog's diet quite regularly without any, head or toe of understanding the dog's choice in that process. And I think that, of course, over the last few years of my practice, I have learned, I've gained more knowledge, and safe to say that isn't something that I follow any longer. Um, but again, the rationale behind this really is because the need of every dog varies, right, according to their physical and emotional state. And so it's never really one size fits all. Nature is filled with abundance. And so while one herb or plant might work for a dog for a specific condition, a dog in another health condition may not actually choose that plant or herb because their needs might look very different. And so we start seeing a lot of these differences and uniqueness to each dog based on their physical, you know, health and emotional composition. Um, but it also seems like there is evidence to show that animals in the wild, and there is just so much information out there about this as well, is that when they would rely on these medicinal plants, they would actually ingest one compound at a time, as opposed to a big mush of them together. And so it makes sense to not only offer these medicinal plants or secondary metabolites one at a time, uh, not with food, because again, food is essentially the primary metabolite. But I think it's also telling us a little bit about, well, I suppose not a little bit, but I think it's telling us a lot about the intelligence that resides within our dogs, right? This ability to ingest something to treat a challenge in the body, to be able to pause and say, okay, is this having the desired effect? Is this making me feel better? Is this challenge getting resolved? If it is, then let's stop. If it is not, then can I have more of this? Or can I have something different to treat this? And there is just so much incredible intelligence in that process. Um, it's also telling me a lot about our dogs' senses of interoception, right? And I think in a previous podcast episode, I spoke about, you know, going beyond the five senses, right? And interoception being the sense of understanding what's going on in your body, what your body is feeling, and sort of being connected to that, um, and and engaging with the external environment in a way that helps you respond to your internal environment. Um, and so this is telling me a lot about our dog's ability and their sense of interoception. And I think this sense of interoception is something that we can very actively strengthen over a period of time. And so we now start seeing this, multiplier effect, I suppose, which is where, the more our dogs are in sync with themselves, the more they're able to make better decisions for themselves, which also includes them having a say in their own healing and recovery journey from sickness. And I think that's just so powerful. And that's so, yeah, that's just so incredibly powerful because um, I think that, I think about personal experiences where, I have not had an understanding of the medication. I have not been explained as to why I'm supposed to swallow a bitter pill or have a bitter syrup. Um, I'm not feeling good about it and I'm just being forced to do it, right? Somebody else is taking those decisions for my health and my well-being, and I have no agency or ownership in that conversation. And that's what we end up doing to our dogs as well. And so I feel like this is such a great way to create another opportunity for agency. This is such a great way to create another opportunity for choice and for them to be equally participative in their healing and recovery journey, and not just us taking the shots at all points in time. And so I feel like this whole observation of dogs being able to self-select and medicate themselves is just so vast and so nuanced and nothing short of magical. Um, and as I talk through a couple of uh, themes as I move forward, I will share a few examples from my own experience with both Luchi and Mutton, and how I've seen that unfolded, and just I continue to be incredibly baffled by it. um yeah, and so Coming back, we were talking about medicinal plant compounds being secondary metabolites, and food being your primary metabolite, right? Because that's where you're getting all of your key nutrients and energy. And the purpose of secondary metabolites really is to fulfill immediate therapeutic needs for the living organism. And so animals will eat these metabolites only for those therapeutic needs. This is not a replacement for food. This is not something that needs to be there in the diet as a permanent basis. And so when the therapeutic need is met, animals are likely to stop consuming these secondary metabolites. And again, I'm going to share a few examples of how I have seen that unfolded with both my dogs. Okay, so how does spirulina feature in all of this? Um, well, that's really because spirulina is a secondary metabolite, right? It is a medicinal plant compound, and it is such a powerhouse of a metabolite. It contains, essential amino acids, carbohydrates, enzymes, vitamins, and other valuable compounds that really make it a quote unquote whole food. Plants in general do not actually contain vitamin B12, but spirulina does. And I mean, it's been around for over 3.6 billion years. That's such a long, oh my God, that's such a long time. I mean, I'm guessing you can sense how excited I am by this, because I think it's just so fascinating that, we have something that is so powerful in nature that has been accessible to animals, for a host of different benefits. And not just animals, right? We've seen some, evidence of how powerful this is even in the context of human beings. So some studies have suggested that spirulina can enhance cell nucleus enzyme activity and repair copying errors during DNA synthesis. So if you're into gene expression and genetics and stuff like that, then this is perhaps an interesting tangent to go off on. But what's also interesting, and this is what I recently found, and I'm going to mention the study in the episode description. So, children who were affected by Chernobyl radiation were actually given spirulina for about 20 days. And interestingly, their urine showed almost a 50% reduction in radioactive levels. I mean, that's just how incredible this plant compound is, right? Um, and to me, like, I think that conclusion from that study, and like I said, I will mention it in the episode description, was just so incredible. And again, I think it's just, for me, it's just coming back to this idea of how magical and transformative and healing nature can be, just how the natural world can offer so many gifts um, for us to feel better and do better and just, thrive. And so I feel like spirulina for me right now is that link to the amazingness that exists in the natural world. And so, even for dogs, right, spirulina has a ton of benefits for allergies, for skin and coat, for arthritis and joint problems, for detoxification. And oh, I'm going to come to that in a bit. I have so much to talk about detoxification with a recent example. For support for aging and growing dogs, for strengthening enzymatic function, and for just really helping the body heal itself. Um, However, it does seem like some breeds, like Dalmatians, are unable to metabolize purine, which is a compound found in spirulina. And so, I think when you are working with Dalmatians, or if you have a Dalmatian and you're listening in, you might want to sort of, um, you know, try spirulina in limited amounts, and also be open to the fact that it may not have that kind of effect for your dog, only because they don't have the ability to metabolize that. Um, and so, one of the ways that I offer spirulina is I offer the green spirulina in powdered form. And the way that I like to do it is I like to put about a teaspoon of it into a bowl with just a little bit of filtered water. And so again, my dogs have the option of going for the slightly wettish spirulina form or the drier one. And then I essentially let them have their hearts fill. And so as they keep, eating the powder, as they keep ingesting the powder, I keep sort of adding the powder. Um, and I make a note of how much I am adding. And so I think I have done this exercise with spirulina about four times in the last year, and I use the year as a timeline only because I did a short course in canine zoo pharmacognosy sometime last year. And so since then I've done this exercise about 3 4 times. You know, I think both with each of my dogs in different capacities. And I think the record so far has been Mutton eating about 25 teaspoons of spirulina. Um, and that was such an interesting exercise. That was such an interesting exercise because I feel like for most part, all of these medicinal plant compounds come with very specific dosages, right? So you have half a teaspoon, quarter teaspoon, 1/8 teaspoon, 1 teaspoon, 1 tablespoon, and it comes with this caveat of do not exceed this, right? And so I feel like this process where I was offering spirulina to Mutton, and this has happened actually only with spirulina and not with other plant compounds that I have offered, um, was also a process of letting go. Uh, and I'm sure that so many of you listening into this can resonate with how hard and challenging that can be. um, this idea that you're doing something in excess, quote unquote excess, and that could be bad for your dog. um, and so this is a great exercise in just letting go and trusting my dog's judgment, trusting my dog's sense of what they need in that moment, um, to feel better with whatever they might be struggling with. um, and so that was interesting. I kept sort of noting down how many teaspoons, and then when it finally hit like 25 and Mutton was done because she just no longer wanted to engage with spirulina anymore, I was like, whoa, that was powerful in so many different ways. And I want to continue to talk about letting go a little bit because again I think that we control so many aspects of our dog's life. We take decisions on their health, on their medical conditions, on their bodies, day in and day out. For most part they don't get a say in that at all, and that's such a horrible form of agency getting ripped away from them. um you know any of us know, and especially I think I think women listeners would resonate with this. Not having agency over your body is just is just not just uncomfortable, but it's just a harrowing, um helpless, powerless kind of situation to be in. And I think that's something for us to just consider and keep in mind as well with our dogs. That while, again, we're not in a situation where we may be able to offer them 100% agency at all times, I think how do we create room for that agency? How do we create room for that choice as much as possible? I think that's important for us to think about and honor. But I also think that, some of us can, and at least and I'll speak about myself. I think in my own pet parenting journey, I think I've been really arrogant to believe that I know exactly what my dogs are feeling physically every single point in time, and the only time that they're feeling off is when they start showing visible symptoms, or when their blood parameters are off, or they're showing elevated levels. But the fact of the matter is that I don't know that. And I think I've been humbled by that multiple times now, that our dogs can be struggling with different challenges day in and day out physiologically. We may not always have a handle on being able to read those. We may not always necessarily recognize those signs, recognize those signals. And I think that there is a lot of pressure that gets released when we say that, okay, our dogs can and our dogs should be equal participants in this healing and recovery journey for themselves. And so, if we were to just simply provide access and perhaps even exposure to different kinds of medicinal plant compounds around them, then it's fair to say that they are more likely to, you know, engage in that healing process as and when they themselves or their body recognizes a challenge, as opposed to waiting for us to pick up those signs, because I think sometimes we can be quite oblivious to them. And we wait till things get really really bad, but it just sort of shifts that agency, I suppose, back to them. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that relationship. I think there's something really beautiful about sharing that space with another being, where we're allowing for them to, and we are allowing, right? And I'm conscious of the fact that we're saying I'm allowing. So we're facilitating perhaps um, this space where, you know, they can tell us what their bodies need, and they can tell us what they need to help themselves feel better. And in my own journey with facilitating spaces like these for my dogs, I just feel like it's made things easier for me in a lot of ways. Because again, it's not me taking on the pressure to constantly think about how do I fix them medically or how do I heal them medically. It's just saying, okay, I'm going to give you these choices, and you tell me what works for you, and we'll work with that, right? And I think that that's just so much easier, I suppose. um and so, yeah, I feel like this journey of watching my dogs self medicate and pick plant compounds for themselves to heal themselves. And again, this is both in the form of powders, this is in the form of hydrosols, this is in the form of essential oils. um, has been extremely interesting, and powerful. And I think it's made me just appreciate and marvel at their intelligence a lot more. And so, with spirulina specifically, coming back to the 25 teaspoons of spirulina that were ingested, I I did honestly think that the excess would cause some sort of gut issues, or would at least give her diarrhea. And safe to say, none of that happened. Um, and again, I think that sort of cemented this idea, right? That dogs know how much of what compound they want to consume, and so they will continue to meet that need again, which is such a powerful reminder. They will continue to feed that need, meet that need, till that need is met. And when that need is met, uh, they will no longer engage with that plant compound. I saw something similar happen even with Luchi, where she actively sought spirulina from, an offering of choices. And I think she went to about 12 teaspoons of them at one point in time, and post that was absolutely fine, in terms of gut, in terms of, all other parameters as well. And again, this is not an exercise that I do every day. It perhaps, I do it. I could definitely do it much more, but I try and do it once in 3 months, once in 4 months, just to get a temp check of where my dogs are at. Um, But what was really interesting a couple of days ago, and this is before we got Mutton's diagnosis with tick fever and her elevated kidney parameters. Um, I sort of offered her spirulina again, thinking that that could be something that could help her with detoxification. um, if there is a buildup of toxins, then often our dogs, while the liver does the work, right? The liver does the work to detoxify. Um, our dogs can often choose plant compounds to sort of just help ease that process a little bit more, and provide a little bit more internal support for that process. So again, this time round, both Luchi and Mutton selected spirulina, and I think Mutton was a little short of 25 teaspoons. Luchi was probably again close to 10, 12 teaspoons, and that was it. And they had it. They seemed to do a little bit better. Mutton specifically seemed like she was quite better immediately. There was a little bit more color in her face, and we sort of crashed for the night. And the next day she ended up purging. um, and that to me was really, really interesting, because I hadn't experienced that. And I had, of course, read about purging, especially after ingesting something like spirulina, theoretically, but I hadn't seen that happen in person. And so, you know, when dogs select remedies such as spirulina to purge, it's usually a way to sort of remove toxins. It is usually as a way to remove any buildup of, let's say, infection, any buildup of certain chemicals that feel toxic to the body. um, and what happens is that when we and we see this, right? So for example, we see dogs eating grass to facilitate purging, but this can also extend to plant remedies and compounds. Um, and so what happens is that when purging is discouraged, it could very well impair the dog's health and vitality, because again, the purging is facilitating this removal of toxins and this buildup and infections. And so what's interesting is that when a spirulina is ingested, if spirulina is selected and ingested for its nutritional um, properties, for its nutrient properties, then it's not likely to show up in the purge. Sorry about that. It's I'm so sorry about that. And I had a moment where I was just like, should I continue, not continue? But I'm down. The weather is changing, and I think I'm coming down with allergies. And now I just don't want to record post 27 minutes. So I'm going to continue. Excuse the sneeze. We can move on. This happens. It's natural. Yeah. So when dogs ingest spirulina for nutrient properties, it's unlikely to show up in the purge. And the reason why I mentioned Mutton's purging is because when she did purge, the mucus and the froth that she had was all green. And so that was really interesting as well to me, to recognize that she was actually selecting spirulina as a way to purge. And purging can often happen anywhere between 12 to 24 hours after a plant compound has been ingested. And so, remedies that are selected to purge are not usually selected in subsequent offerings. And so, again, that's something that I had sort of tried to say, okay, you've purged. Now, do you want to go back to spirulina with Mutton? And she seemed to not be interested anymore in that. And so, I think that I think that it's really, really interesting uh, to see how all of these different things interact when it comes to our dog's health and well-being. Um, because again, I think there's just so much about them and their intelligence and their connection with the natural world, um, that we don't know about, that we don't understand about. And I think that in the long run, I feel like there are lots of lessons for us to learn from some of these different observations and experiences. I think just thinking a lot about, one, how do we offer more agency, more choice, more room for dogs to make decisions about their own selves, in the way that they share our lives with us. I think that's definitely something that, you know, I think can be helpful to sort of think a lot about. I think the other one is, how do we enhance this sense of interoception for them, right? Because again, and this is a whole other topic which I'm definitely going to come back to in a podcast episode. There is so much that numbs down that sense. I don't think it's so much about like an on and off kind of a button, but I think that there can be a lot of numbing down of that sense of interoception, especially when animals or living beings, and this is true for even us, when we are bombarded with sensory information, with sensory overload. If we are constantly made to not listen to our bodies, then it's likely that that sense numbs down over a period of time, or our reading of our own selves goes off. And so, how do we enhance and strengthen that for our dogs? Because again, we see that multiplier effect when they are able to read their bodies better. They can make better decisions for themselves, not just in terms of their own health and well being, but also in the way that they cope with the environment around them. Um, and I think the third is, for most of our pet dogs, they have grown up in concrete jungles. They, at least here in Gurgaon, for example, I see so many of them living in, cities. Obviously, living in apartments with very, very little, very minimal contact with nature and the natural world. Um, and so, how do we facilitate that relationship and space for that kind of engagement is also something for us to think about. Not to say that all of us should move to the forests with our dogs, but I think that there are a lot of things we can do on an ongoing basis to facilitate that. And again, I feel like that engagement with the natural world not only has benefits for our dogs, but it also has so many benefits for us, in terms of you know our own well-being and emotional states as well. So I feel like that's another thing that we could definitely think about. And interestingly, I feel like I've got three new podcast ideas based on those reflections and takeaways. But yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble really about the benefits of spirulina and their awesomeness. Um, I hope that this was helpful and insightful, and that I didn't sort of veer off into multiple different tangents. Excuse my sneezing in the episode. Hopefully, my allergies don't come down too strong, and I'm able to do a sneeze-free episode the next week. Um, yeah, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening in. I will be back with a new episode, hopefully next week or the week after. But till then, lots of love to your dogs from Luchi, Mutton, and I.